Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. This video you're about to watch, along with all the ones to follow, will be focused on explaining how various TV shows, games, movies, and books exemplify different aspects of storytelling and how we can incorporate the lessons these IPs teach into our own personal works. Now, while I could go on explaining the format of these videos, I think it would be more instructive to show you what this channel is about throughout this video instead of telling you what it's about in this introduction. With that said, let's dive right in. In my previous video, I went over how Code Geass introduces its protagonist through effective world building, and today we'll be discussing how Breaking Bad introduces its Deuteragonist, Jesse Pinkman. I mentioned in the last video how talking about Lelouch was one of the ideas that got me actively excited about pursuing this path, and the same can be said for this video. Why? Well, for one, Breaking Bad is probably my favorite TV show of all time. Now, I've never really taken the time to sit down and rank my favorite shows, but in the few moments I'm taking to say this, no other show really comes to mind. A possible exception might be for Better Call Saul, but either way, it doesn't change why I wanted to talk about Breaking Bad on this channel the first chance I got. If it sounds weird that I said the phrase, the first chance I got, in my third video explaining how to introduce storytelling elements in your own personal works, then technically you're right. However, something I haven't really brought up yet is how I decided to do the subject matter for these videos. I, like everyone else, have my favorite creators here on YouTube, and something I've seen time and time again is creators talk about how they feel confined by the content that made them popular in the first place. I've also read a plethora of comments from people on other channels talk about how they're going to unsubscribe due to the creators straying away from the content that they liked. It's because of those experiences I have seen others have that I've decided not to limit myself to talking about one particular IP here on this channel. I have an interest in a wide variety of IPs, and as a creator I want to make videos talking about all of them instead of just one of them. To that end, when I was mapping out my first set of videos, I decided that every video had to feature a different IP. Anyway, let's get back to the subject at hand, shall we? Our initial introduction to Jesse happens here in episode 1. The scene starts with Walter, the protagonist, who is a brilliant chemist who recently learned he has terminal lung cancer and has decided to go on a ride along with his DEA brother-in-law to a raid on a meth lab to see it set up, sitting in the back of his aforementioned brother-in-law's car on the ride along. Hank, Walt's brother-in-law, and his partner Steve have just exited the vehicle to check on the house to see if it's safe for Walt to take a look, leaving Walter by himself in the car. Shortly after, we get our first shot of Jesse, who is climbing out of a second-story window at a nearby house in his underwear. While at this point we don't have any context for this, we can tell that something is up due to the frantic nature of Jesse's actions. The odd nature of what's going on perplexes Walter when he notices, and even makes him worried when Jesse falls off the roof. Walt then recognizes Jesse when he stands up, and Jesse recognizes Walt when they make eye contact. Seconds later, Jesse runs to his car and flees the scene. Okay, so what does our initial introduction to Jesse tell us about his character? Well, for one, he's young, probably in his mid-20s. Next, even though Walt and Jesse do not speak to each other in this scene, it is clear through Jesse's body language and reactions that he has some kind of connection with the house being raided. The way he hides himself, quiets Walt, and flees the scene indicate to us that he had a sizable connection to the house that was just raided, so through that we can infer Jesse is involved in the meth business. Next, the way he rolls his eyes when he and Walt look at each other shows us that they know each other, and given that we already know that Walt is a high school chemistry teacher, there is a high likelihood that Jesse was a former student of his. So, in Jesse's first scene, we learn that he is a young man involved in the meth business and knows Walter in some capacity, but most likely as a former student. These three elements of Jesse's character are the foundations for his involvement with the show, and so it makes sense that the writers of Breaking Bad showed us them in his initial introduction. Now, I want to take some time and talk about why these elements are so important to making Jesse such an effective Deuteragonist. To me, and the majority of Breaking Bad fans I have spoken to over the years, one of the main aspects of Jesse that makes him such an effective Deuteragonist is that he is a near-perfect foil to Walter. Walter is 50 when we first meet him, while Jesse is in his 20s. Walter is a chemistry genius, while Jesse isn't. Walt is a teacher while Jesse was, and by the end of the episode is a student. Walt has no experience or connections with the meth business, while Jesse has both. We learn more about both characters throughout the show that adds even more contrasting layers to their personalities, but even with what we've talked about so far, there are more than enough differences between them to make their interactions interesting and engaging. And that is the first point I want to bring up in regards to writing your own Deuteragonist. While they do not have to be a stark contrast to the protagonist per se, their involvement in the story has to engage with the protagonist in a compelling way. They are typically the two most important characters in the work, and if they share a lot of scenes together, their interactions must be compelling, engaging, and interesting, otherwise your audience will find them and the story boring. Like I said earlier, they do not have to be a stark contrast to one another, like Jesse and Walt, but they do have to challenge or highlight some aspect of the other's character in ways that your audience finds interesting enough to continue on with your work. The next scene has Walter fighting Jesse that night and blackmailing him into cooking meth with him. It's here that we learn that Jesse is in fact a former student of Walter's, and that Walter does not have a very high opinion of Jesse. During the scene, we see Jesse and Walter question, challenge, and backtalk the other, with Walter ultimately manipulating Jesse to do what he wants by the end of the exchange. This interaction establishes the foundation of their relationship moving forward, and when you are crafting the sequence where your Deuteragonist is introduced, consider doing much of the same. It's because of this scene that every interaction Walt and Jesse have throughout the series feels natural. Walt and Jesse may talk, bicker, argue, and fight, but thanks to this scene, we know that at the end of it all, Walt will try and manipulate Jesse, and Jesse will cave. This is also what makes Jesse's change in Season 5 so satisfying to watch. But this video is about his introduction, not his character growth, so I'll table that thought for now. The next scene with Jesse shows Walt giving him the money to buy the RV. We see another question-riddled exchange where Jesse challenges Walt that ends with Jesse being subservient to Walt's authority. I mentioned earlier that the Deuteragonist needs to highlight some aspect of the protagonist, and Jesse does that here. His questions are directly aimed at Walter's character motivations, which brings attention to the core of Walter's character. Walter's rebuttal when he asks Jesse why he cooks meth reveals his motivation, which is admittedly shallow at this point in the story, but that can also serve as a way to contrast these two even further. However, Jesse's answer of money mainly, and Walt's response of there you go, gives us a connection that binds them together in spite of their contrasting natures. Now, I'm tempted to dig into how the dynamic between Walt and Jesse sets the groundwork for how their relationship develops throughout the show, but I won't because I want to focus on what we learn about Jesse in the episode we are introduced to him in. But anyone who has watched the show can pretty clearly see how their first interactions in the show lead to moments they shared later in the seasons. Going back to the next scene with Jesse, however, we can see just how much Walt and Jesse contrast each other. Jesse calls a barn he sees a few miles away a cow house, which stuns Walter. Then, Walter's views on safety clash with Jesse's pride and sense of shame. Then, after the cook, Walter asks Jesse how they proceed. Jesse says they cook again the next day, and he knows who to talk to. Then, he comments on his desire to try some of the meth. In this exchange, Jesse calls Walt an artist, and Walt downplays the meth as basic chemistry and scolds Jesse when he tries to smoke. Every interaction here serves to highlight just how different Walt and Jesse are from each other, and even how they are similar in some ways. For example, Walt is as bumbling and clueless when it comes to the streets as Jesse is when it comes to cooking. So again, the point I'm getting at is every scene and every interaction Walt and Jesse have in the first episode of Breaking Bad has both of them highlighting characteristics of the other and shows how their contrasting natures lead to interesting and compelling situations. I touched on this a bit earlier, but while you don't have to make your Deuteragonist a foil to your protagonist, Breaking Bad shows how effective it can be to have aspects of your two main characters be in conflict with each other. Now, another point that is important to keep in mind is that while they have contrarian personalities, they share the same basic goal to make money by selling meth. That shared goal is the key to keeping them from being each other's antagonists. As the show progresses, that goal changes, but what doesn't change is that Walt and Jesse continue to share the same goal, which ultimately keeps them on the same side. Times where this shared goal is threatened leads to some of the most tense moments in the show, and when their goals finally differ in Season 5, the entire show changes. I say all of that to say that if you decide to make your Deuteragonist and protagonist antagonistic towards each other, then you have to ensure that they share a strong, common goal to keep your audience from wondering why they are even on the same side to begin with. In conclusion, when you are creating your Deuteragonist, make sure that they have a strong enough personality to keep the scenes they are in from getting boring. You also need to make sure that the first handful of interactions your audience has with your Deuteragonist establishes the most essential core aspects of their character. Furthermore, those interactions need to highlight the main aspects of the protagonist. It is not necessary for your two primary characters to be at odds with one another, but conflict is an effective way to create dynamic intrigue throughout your story, as Breaking Bad shows with Jesse and Walt. Alright, so with all that said, I think I've covered everything I wanted to, so I think it's time to move on to the outro. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, then I want to say thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed my content. If you did, then please consider leaving a like, a comment telling me what you thought of the video, and subscribing to my channel for more videos like this every 2 weeks. I also have a Twitter and a Discord server, so if you're a writer looking to network with other writers, or if you just enjoy my content, then feel free to give me a follow and join the server. Links for all my social media platforms will be in the description below. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.